it's only a couple $100. When I get my next paycheck, I'll pay this off, right? You do that 27 times, and next thing you know, there's more a month than there is money. The thing that was never taught to us is your mindset around how you handle money is infinitely more important than how much money you make. Because if you have $100,000 a year and your brain knows how to handle $30,000, it's going to get rid of $70,000 of that real fast. Yep. It's comforting to look at your budget when it's nice, right? Like when you can look at your budget and you're like, oh, I'm going to have some leftover money, it's a little easier to budget those days.
You don't learn how to manage your personal finances in school, right? Not just money, it's cash flow. It's not a steady state. Like it's constantly a flow. And so it's really about learning how do I master that flow. At the very beginning, you've got to be strategic and you've got to pick the most important things first. And don't be so concerned about getting to the end state and having all of your hands in all of the buckets that you lose the momentum that you can gain by focusing on the most important thing.
The U.S. is moving closer and closer to becoming a cashless economy because it's easier for them to sustain it, but it's harder for the average consumer to sustain that.
It was no work to get you into a bad financial situation. So to get out of a bad financial situation is probably going to take some effort, right? And
some people drive around with like car payments that are like $700, $1,000 a month, and you just can't afford it.
We end up $10-ing purchasing ourselves into debt.
The purpose of a budget actually should be freeing. Like it should be exciting because you should be working towards a goal.
There was like a pretty startling statistic that like 40% of Americans can't get a hold of $1,000 cash.
Instead of looking for financial security or financial safety, for me it's about strategy, right?
I would try to find a mentor who would be willing to look at your finances. That mentor has to be somewhere further along in life than you are. Hi everybody, welcome to the Next Level podcast. I'm Jen Santamarina.
Joe Santamarina.
Andrew Smith.
And today we really just want to be talking about financial goal setting. So this is a really interesting topic, and I think for some people it's exciting. For other people it causes anxiety to talk about finances.
This is true.
I feel like there's a lot of different spectrums of emotions when it comes to finances. Not just sharing, but then also looking at your own, right? That can be very emotionally, I don't want to say damaging, but it can be emotionally challenging for some people.
Because you're in it. Like you're living all the day to day. You're feeling all the things. Like when things don't match, like you feel that.
Yeah. I think also too, people feel like when they look at it, they start passing judgment on themselves, or other people are passing judgment on what they did or didn't do. And so I think that's where a lot of the anxiety comes from.
Yeah, for sure.
But we really want to talk a little bit about some of our experiences, and then we also want to give some pointers and some tips because with financial goal setting, it's really kind of twofold, I think. That number one, it's about teaching yourself about how to budget and tracking your finances, which is number one, right?
Yeah, and budget's kind of like,
taboo
just taboo. No one wants to talk about budgeting, so we'll call it a financial game plan then.
Yeah, financial game plan. And then the second part of it is setting goals for yourself, because what we've been talking about in the last couple of podcasts are just advancing your life, taking it to the next level. And a lot of that comes down to money and finances. And so if you're going to be able to hit those goals, you need to be able to have set them. So we're going to talk about strategically setting some short and midterm and long-term goals when it comes to your finances. So I guess I'd like to just kick it off and maybe ask you guys a couple of questions. So first of all, neither one of us really had like a background in finances and didn't get raised to be taught on how to really manage our money. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, 100%.
Correct.
Okay.
For sure.
100%.
So it took us going outside of our family blueprint, if you will, to be able to seek somebody with some knowledge on how to do finances and budgeting for ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So, Andrew, do you mind telling, just whatever you feel comfortable sharing about maybe your financial background, maybe where you started and kind of where you're at today with in returns of your personal finances and budgeting?
Yeah, for sure. I would definitely say that our financial budgeting was started at the bottom. Now we're here. That's the best way to say it. I mean, when we met you guys, we had 27 different credit cards from pretty much every retailer you could think of, from Walmart to Best Buy to GameStop to
Macy's?
Probably Macy's.
That was my first credit card ever.
Kohl's for sure, right? And some of those were really large, right? Like $2,000-$3,000 balances. Some of them were a couple $100. And basically, we had about $75,000 in consumer debt when we first met you guys.
Wow.
A couple years ago. And the thing about financial budgeting was the fact that, number one, it's very easy to access credit cards.
Yeah.
Specifically at the lower end. So if you're getting a credit card that's only $200-$300, first of all, your brain says it's only a couple $100. When I get my next paycheck, I'll pay this off. Right? You do that 27 times, and next thing you know, there's more month than there is money. Right? And there's more month than there is money every single month. And so we kind of had ourselves in a position where we were basically going backwards, like $1,500, $2,000 a month, just in miscellaneous expenditures, and our budget got to the point where it was write it on paper, and then that hurts so much I'm never going to look at that thing again. I do it one time, and then maybe I'll see it next year. We'll just kind of stumble our way through. And I was raised in a house where my dad owned his own business, and we always worked really hard growing up. And so my parents always had the saying of, you work hard, play hard, and you can always make more money, right? Which is not necessarily a lie. There is always opportunities to make more money, but the thing that was never taught to us is your mindset around how you handle money is infinitely more important than how much money you make. Mm-hmm. Because if you have $100,000 a year and your brain knows how to handle $30,000, it's going to get rid of $70,000 of that real fast. Yeah. And I found that out real quick. Went to the Army, was active duty for a couple of years, and we're making good money, and then left active duty to go to the civilian sector and cut about 50% of my paycheck. And so we were living like I still had 100% of that paycheck. And so, we had the 27 credit cards basically to keep up appearances and impress people that we didn't even like, because we felt like it was needed, right? It was, right. Oh, these are my peer group. And then, you walk away from that peer group, never talk to them again, but you put yourself $70,000, $80,000 in debt to impress them. Right. And so, that was kind of the mindset and where our budget really was. I can't even say budget because there was no budgeting going on when we first met you guys. And I would say probably 2-3 weeks into meeting you, we had a good budgeting session. And I'll be honest, like, one of the coolest parts for meeting you was just the fact of the transparency of, hey, man, like, budgeting isn't fun for anybody. We got a pretty solid budget. You guys actually had leftover money at the end of your month, which was like an unheard of fact in our household. And so just seeing that, we're like, okay, so whatever they're doing is better than what we're doing. And in the beginning, it was, throw it against the wall and see what sticks. And we just kind of hammered it out, took some extra jobs. Kristen's my wife's name. I've probably mentioned her a couple times on this, but we're basically both working 3 jobs just to make the budget work, and dig ourselves out of it. And we got ourselves to a position now where, we're debt free. We haven't bought, just bought and built a brand new home in South Carolina, to get closer to you guys and, some friends and family and stuff. And it's worked out, really, really nice. And now we budget every 2 days, every 3 days, just for the fact of it's comforting to look at your budget when it's nice, right? Like when you can look at your budget and you're like, oh, I'm gonna have some leftover money. It's a little easier to budget those days, know? And so, I would definitely say that. That's a long-winded answer to say that started at the bottom and now we're here is probably the TLDR version of that.
Nice.
Anything that you'd like to share about our financial background and kind of where we started, just to like maybe set some people at ease so they don't feel like, well, easy for you probably have a bunch of money or you came from money.
Yeah,
which we did not.
I think for us, like, I think one thing that I had to get over was like, you don't learn how to manage your personal finances in school, right? Like, no. I mean, in high school they offered some like, intro to business classes, and they like taught you a little bit about checking and savings accounts, but it wasn't like anything exhaustive. I went to school for applied mathematics, but like I took courses on imaginary numbers and like, you know, that's what I wanted my account to look like. You know, sometimes, you know, I had some imaginary numbers I would like to put in there.
Some imaginary dollars for my groceries.
Right. But it didn't really help us understand like the fundamentals of really, it's not just money, it's cash flow because time keeps ticking. And expenses keep coming in, and cash keeps coming in, and so it's the thing is that it's not a steady state. Like it's constantly a flow, and so it's really about learning how do I master that flow. And then when random things pop up, like breaks, which newsflash are not random, right? Got to get my breaks done. You know, how do you smooth some of that out and really prepare for some of those types of things? And so for us, you know, when we got out of college, you know, we were, you know, over $90,000 in student loan debt.
Good old RPI.
Yeah, good old RPI. And RPI is the name of the college I went to, for those of you that may not be from upstate New York. And so a little over $90,000 in student loan debt, had a few credit cards, probably around $20,000 or $30,000 in consumer debt, a couple of car payments, and, you know, for only job I could get was moving 1,000 miles away to the middle of Wisconsin. And, you know, I remember looking at apartments, and there was an apartment I wanted that was like $700 a month. And there was an apartment that Jen wanted that was like $900 a month. And this was back in 2010. So just to kind of understand that's like, you know, it's a lot more.
We're bringing that up.
Oh, we're bringing that up, right? Because like, right, you know, I sort of was just anticipating like maybe this might be a culture shock, but Jen's like, no, like this is the one I want. And I was like, all right, sounds good. And I loved that apartment. That apartment was great.
It was a nice apartment.
But I tell you what, like about 2 months after getting in that apartment, the credit cards just kept creeping higher and higher and higher. But it wasn't the apartment's fault, right? It was also some spending habits' fault. So. Yeah. That's a little bit about our background, and you know, today, you know, we're totally debt free, paid off all of our debt outside of our house, and got money in the bank. We've gone on several vacations, got our 401k, you know, funded, and there's a lot of different things going on. But it takes a lot of discipline, a lot of work, and so hopefully, you know, we could talk a little bit about how people get there, and maybe some of the things we prioritized early on to start getting to a place of results. Because I think what happens is a lot of people hear these buzzwords: 401k, Roth IRA, 503b, you know, all these different buzzwords, and they think that they should do all of them at the same time. Emergency fund, snowball effect, right? And the reality is that at the very beginning, you've got to be strategic, and you've got to pick the most important things first. And don't be so concerned about getting to the end state and having all of your hands in all of the buckets that you lose the momentum that you can gain by focusing on the most important thing.
Yeah. So I think because I really love application, right, and straight talk. So I think now that you've understood or kind of gotten a drift of most of our background when it comes to finances, when we first started talking about first got introduced and started focusing on budgeting and financial goals, the first thing that we did is we took a look at all of our income and then all of our outgo. Okay. And for us in the beginning, the outgo surpassed the income. And that's why we were going backwards every month. And so that was very sobering, and it was a little bit scary, but it was a necessary first step, right? So, and I recommend that people do that in a spreadsheet. A spreadsheet, that's so old-fashioned. That's too bad. Like, a spreadsheet is what I would recommend because you are now the person in charge of all of the monies that you're putting in all of the categories. And your brain mentally, when you start looking at a category that says eating out and you realize that last month you spent like $500 or more on eating out, it doesn't separate it as just like putting it in an app that just kind of totals everything and like smushes it all together for you. Now you literally get to see, oh, I spent $500 eating out last month and I'm going backwards. So maybe that's a place where I need to like cut it off or limit it for now, right? And so I think that teaching yourself off a spreadsheet and getting in control of your finances is probably in my opinion, better than starting off with a financial app or a tool that you subscribe to, because you're not teaching yourself, you're letting the app do all the thinking and the work for you.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point, because I think the big part about like how do people get into bad financial situations, right? They lack discipline, they lack knowledge, right? They lack understanding, they lack awareness.
It's separating your spending from the actual monies that you have in your physical possession.
Exactly.
When you're just swiping.
There's no emotional attachment to swiping a credit card.
Right.
Yeah.
Or swiping any card.
It doesn't
right?
feel the same as like going in your wallet and physically taking out money and giving it away.
You
from
see that
someone.
stack dwindle, right? Like
Right.
as you spend money, it slowly goes down. And I think like to the fact of the matter is like the U.S. is moving closer and closer to becoming a cashless economy because it's easier for them to sustain it, but it's harder for the average consumer to sustain that. Mm-hmm. And so if we don't get a handle on our finances now, then when you're sitting in a cashless society and everything is swiping and you don't have the discipline to know every time I slide this plastic piece, it takes a piece of money out of my account and puts it into somebody else's account, then you're just going to set yourself up for more and more heartache later on.
For
Yeah,
sure.
but going back to the point that you were making about like using like a financial app that kind of categorizes some of your spending, I think you just bring up a really good point. Like when you actually take the time to categorize it yourself, total it up yourself, you're making that initial investment, which to a lot of people are like, oh, well, that sounds like work. Well, yeah, like, it was no work to get you into a bad financial situation. So to get out of a bad financial situation is probably going to take some effort, right? And I think there's just so much value in making that physical investment to really understanding the numbers and understanding all the basics. And I would just encourage people just to not use, well, I'm not a numbers person as an excuse, right?
Because I'm not either.
Exactly.
I love doing a budget now. I used to like be afraid of it, but now it's exciting. But so I think that's the first step, right? Is figure out your income and then categorize your expenses and figure out your outgo. Then it's to analyze, what's going on. If you're going backwards, then it's figuring out, okay, well, where could I potentially cut so I can stop the bleeding? That's what we used to call it, right? We want to first stop the bleeding, and then we'll continue to get better from there. So for us, our bleeding was eating out.
Chipotle, guilty.
Starbucks.
Chicken burrito.
Starbucks, yeah, $4. It's now $7, but irregardless. So, Starbucks, eating out, Chipotle. I think also too, just when you're going into the store and maybe your grocery store, just that spending. Have you ever walked into a grocery store and you are determined to get groceries for the week, but you end up getting a bunch of junk that can't make any meals? Like that impulse buy, we would always do that, and we would end up spending like a ton of money on like crackers and cookies and drinks and all this stuff. And now we're like, there's no food, there's nothing to eat here, I gotta go eat out. It's like, okay, well, I really didn't make a grocery list and stick to what I essentially need first, and then go get what I want second. So stop the bleeding. It might be somebody's car. Some people drive around with like car payments that are like $700, $1,000 a month, and you just can't afford it. And so we've gotten, we've received coaching and mentorship before saying like, hey, if your goals are, if you're really serious about your financial goals, maybe you need to sell the car that you're in and get out of it and downgrade and get into a car that's going to cost you less money so you can have more cash flow in your budget. That might be a big thing too.
Yeah. I heard a painful statement that if you can, affording the car payment and affording the car are two completely different things. And I think it was Dave Ramsey actually that said it. And I'm gonna be honest, I was like, this guy sucks. Like, what you mean I can't afford the car? Like, I can straight up afford the car. And the fact of the matter is, like, you can't afford the car. Affording the car is paid off. Yeah. And you're putting money aside for any of the miscellaneous expenses, unexpected expenses that come with a car, right? To your point, right? Brakes, rotors, things like that. All that stuff for people is like emergency expenses when they're not real emergencies because you know that they're coming, right? Yeah. You know that this is coming. And so we end up $10 purchasing ourselves into debt. Like very, very rarely do you talk to someone and they're like, I'm just overwhelmed by medical debt or some student loan debt. Obviously that's a part of it. But most of the time it's consumer debt from $7 Starbucks or $10 Chipotle or $15 Chick-fil-A, right? Whatever it is. And instead of them going there and saying, well, I did this 20 times during the month, and so it wasn't $10, it was $200, then, they just do it every month. And I say they, when I say they, I mean myself, but we're no longer mentally in that category. So I distance myself from my previous self, but we made the same mistakes. Yeah. $10, $20 purchases yourself into 75 grand in debt.
Yeah. And, going back to the budgeting piece, like, I feel like a lot of people feel like budgets, like when they think budget, they think restriction. Mm-hmm. And, I think the point of this conversation is to talk about financial goal setting. Right. So the purpose of a budget actually should be freeing. Like, it should be exciting because you should be working towards a goal, right? And I think, just to kind of circle the conversation back to that, kind of going along with your applications tips, all right, identifying the income outgo, identifying, stop the bleeding. And then it's, well, what is your next goal? Like, what am I trying to accomplish here? Like, am I trying to save for a new home? Am I trying to get out of debt? Am I trying to pay for that vacation coming up? Am I trying to pay for my kids' braces? Do I need to free up an extra $200 of cash flow so my kid can go to, a basketball camp, over the summer, or whatever the case may be? And it's really getting very, very specific about what am I trying to do? How much is it going to cost me? Is it either in a one-time expense or in a monthly cash flow? Okay. And then, so then what adjustments do I need to make so that we can start moving towards that?
Yeah, and I think also too is it a short-term goal? Is it something that's reachable in the short term and that you need to reach in the short term? Is it a mid-range goal? Is it a long-term goal, right? So I feel like anything that's like 10 to 15 years is probably more of a long-term goal. Definitely. And then you've got a mid-range goal that could be like anywhere between maybe 2 to 5 years, and then you've got a short-term goal that could be a couple of months to maybe 2 years or something like that, give or take, right? And so like Joe said, just identifying what your goals are is a really big importance, because then you can prioritize what you're doing with your cash flow to be able to hit that goal. So for instance, if it's to get out of debt, once you figure out what your cash flow or your cash flow is, your income minus your expenses gives you what you have left over, then you can figure out, okay, well, this is how much money I have left over that I could apply to some of my debt, because getting out of debt is your goal. Or this is what I can do to be able to subsidize my kids, basketball camp. Or this is what I could do to, for us early on in our marriage, we had kids really early, and one of our goals was to be able to get me home or to be able to have me work very part-time. And so there was a certain amount of money that we needed to make to be able to have me not have to work 40 hours a week. And it was around $800. It wasn't anything crazy, but it's like, okay, well, now that I know my budget, I had $200 left over. So now I have to figure out how to come up with $600, right? So did you want to say
I just want to dig into that for a minute. And one of the reasons that it was only $800 is because even though you made more in your job, what we realized is if you continued working in your job, we were also going to have to pay for daycare. Mm-hmm. And so when you factored in the income from your job minus the daycare and kind of did out all the math and actually looked at not necessarily just your income, but truly what were our expenses, it was really not a huge amount of money that was needed. And then the other piece is that sometimes your goals are linked. Sometimes,
that's why I like the spreadsheet, because you can't do that in an app.
No, you can't do that in an app. And a lot of times the goals are linked because, all right, my goal is for Jen to come home. We need an extra $600 of cash flow. Well, that $600 of cash flow could come from additional income being added to the income, but it also could come from somewhere where there's $600 of less outgo, and maybe that's tied into a debt. Maybe you're spending $600 a month on student debt or on a car payment, and if you were able to lessen that debt, now you're actually freeing up more cash flow. And so a lot of times these things are interlinked, and a lot of times I think our primary thinking is, well, I can't cut back anymore, so let me just increase my income. But sometimes you can actually really, if you look at things, maybe it's just, well, how can I get rid of this one particular debt or rearrange some things so I can free up just a little bit more cash flow to do something else?
For sure.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that I'd like to mention too, before we talk about maybe how we could potentially increase our income, is just talk about maybe an order of things that we got taught. So one of our mentors talked to us about having an emergency fund, which is a basic Dave Ramsey step. We don't promote for Dave Ramsey. We're not affiliated with Dave Ramsey, but I do love Dave Ramsey's thought process on a lot of things when it comes to saving money and getting out of debt. So he has this thing called an emergency fund where I feel like everybody should have it, because he says basically crap's gonna happen to everybody, right? He calls it Murphy's Law. Murphy's gonna come get you, right? And so you need to have some money set aside so that when stuff happens and your whole budget doesn't just fall apart, right?
Yeah.
And so generally speaking, most people recommend at least $1,000 in an emergency fund. Now, if you've got, kids or a house, maybe you need a little bit larger of an emergency fund.
2023 inflation.
Right.
Yeah. Seriously.
But that's a great place to start if you don't have an emergency fund. And there was like a pretty startling statistic that like 40% of Americans can't get a hold of $1,000 cash in their hand. And I was like, well, that's crazy. We live in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and like we can't get a hold of $1,000. Yeah. But so emergency fund was one of the first things that we worked towards.
Yep.
And then we started working towards, getting ourselves a little bit out of debt, because we wanted to prioritize decreasing our spending while increasing our income, so that we could accomplish that goal for me to be able to stay home. And our biggest thing that we tackled the easy stuff, which was like decreasing our eating out and making sure that we were smart with the purchases of our vehicles. And, we bought used cars, good used cars, but used cars, so that we didn't have to suffer it dropping in price as soon as we drove it off the lot and be upside down in it. And then we started increasing our income outside of our jobs to be able to subsidize some of the goals. But then after the emergency fund and we started paying off a little bit of debt, we got also taught to have start putting away 3 to 6 months loss of income fund. And at first, when I first heard that, I was like, that's a little excessive. Like 3 months loss of income fund, like it shouldn't take you 3 months to find a new job. But then what really made me appreciate this step was COVID. When the whole world like shut down and a lot of people lost their jobs for more than 3 months. Now, I know the government subsidized a lot of that, but if they hadn't, like a lot of people would be up Chocolate Creek without a popsicle stick.
And you never, you really never want to be in a position where you're dependent on the government or anybody. Because,
go get your own.
Yeah, because, fundamentally, if you don't take that responsibility, then you're depending on someone else. And what if that other person doesn't come through? What if what if the government doesn't come through, right? And sometimes we just put a little bit too much reliance on other people, and this is an area where we really want to have a high degree of independence
and ownership,
and really only look to fall back on things in true dire situations.
Yeah, because there's a sense of pride in being able to take care of yourself.
100%.
And when you're an adult and you have to be breastfed by the government so you can survive, that's a little bit ridiculous. I don't care if people don't agree with that. But that is my opinion. And my opinion is based up by some highly solid facts. So, which is also my opinion, which I understand, but that's okay. So anyways, and after the 3 to 6 months loss of income fund, we were really taught to start to be able to diversify our income and to start to add additional income out on top of our job.
And I would say before reaching those milestones, starting to diversify.
We started doing that simultaneously.
It's really simultaneous. And a lot of this just comes down to what are your goals, right?
And your priorities.
And your priorities. Because like if your goals are to be very safe, then maybe you just want to just take it one step at a time.
Right.
But if your goals are really driving you to not prioritize safety, but prioritize true happiness and creating wealth for your family, then you taking out a little bits of risk by trying to do things simultaneously, and I, in my opinion, are worth it. Because if you don't take any risks, you also take away all the opportunity for good things to happen.
Right.
And so you just have to find the right balance of how do I be strategic. That's the word I like to use instead of looking for financial security or financial safety. For me, it's about strategy, right? Strategy implies that I'm looking for gain, I'm looking for growth, but I'm also being very wise about it.
Yeah, and I think that's also where maybe we started to, like, our mentors taught us a little bit different than the Dave Ramsey steps, because there's just focus on getting out of debt. Every little cent goes into getting out of debt. Where you and I took a little bit more of a balanced approach, and we got out of debt very heavily. We paid off $90,000 of student loans by ourselves. And we did that in a shorter period of time than most people would do. And then we paid off our cars, and we paid off our credit cards, and we got out of debt. And we grinded it out, and we hustled. But part of the reason we were able to do that is because we started something on the side that started making us an extra $200 a month. Then it grew to $500 a month, then $1,000 a month. And by the time we were making $3,000 a month on the side of our jobs, we were slapping our debt. And that really gave us that leverage that we needed to get out of the debt that we wanted to fast. And so if we didn't have that investment mentality of some sweat equity and a little bit of finances, then we wouldn't have gotten out of debt the way that we did, in my opinion.
Yeah, and maybe I think we're going to have another podcast that really goes really deeply into some of the different options to increase income. But maybe, Andrew, you can just touch on let's just say, you're someone that's listened to this conversation and you just need more income. It's very clear you need more income. Fundamentally, what are all the different possibilities of increasing your income? Obviously, you guys explored pretty much all of them. So
yeah, explored, tested, tried, stamp of approval, right? Some of them, and so to kind of piggyback on some of the stuff you guys said. So there was two main things that kind of helped us first explore options to begin with. Number one is understanding that you will suffer pain in your life one way or the other. It's either going to be the pain of regret or it's going to be the pain of discipline. And most people, they go too far down the regret lane, if you will, before they get to the point where they're like, okay, I think it's time to discipline myself so I don't have to keep doing this, right? And for us, we were so far down that road, we were suffering the pain of regret and discipline at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
And that's really hard, right? And so when we looked at our budget, there's really only two ways to fix your budget. And it's either increase your income or decrease your outgo. Those are the only two ways to fix holes or leaky budget, right? And we were maxing out the expenditure. So the first thing that we did, we looked at our budget, we pulled back basically anything that was non-essential. Most people, internet is going to be essential at this point. A lot of people are remote and stuff like that, so I would keep that, but maybe not the $115 extra super gaming internet or whatever you have. Maybe the $50, $60 internet is going to be enough. Things like that. Netflix, Hulu, all those things. We had every single streaming service you could possibly think of, cut a lot of those out. Left one because we did have two kids, and so you don't go too nutty. Because what you'll find out is Dave Ramsey talks a lot about being gazelle intense, and I think there's a lot of validity to that, but some people that are not used to the pain of discipline will kind of do one of these. They'll go super heavy real quick, and then 3 days, maybe 3 weeks later, boom, they're right back. And
the freak out.
And usually the freak out is worse than the original.
30-day freak
right?
out.
So you'll go,
People do that with dieting too. They stop eating all of it, and then all of a sudden they just put it all back.
And then some.
And some.
Right? It's you lost 3 pounds and you gained 7, right. Or you paid off $300 in debt and then you gained $700, right? That's a very, very real scenario. So understanding yourself and kind of easing your way into the pain of discipline was one step that we kind of looked at. Part of that pain of discipline is the fact that we have to increase our income, because just decreasing expenses is going to take me 75,000 years to get out of debt, right? We had, 75, close to $80,000. Probably even more than that. I can't remember what our car payments were at that point. So with 2 cars, so you add those 2 on top of them, I'm sure it was up over that. And the thing is, when we were looking at our debt completely, we were like, well, if all we do is decrease our expenses to the point where I'm spending $200 a month and living on ramen noodles and beans and rice, that is not a livable situation with 2 kids, and that's not a situation that you can keep up long enough to pay $75,000 off. It's going to literally take you 10 to 15 years. And so we're like, I'm not doing 10 to 15 years of this. It's too much. And our discipline was like, I'm just going to suffer it real hard for the next 2 to 3 years. And that was a very real scenario. It's going to take a couple years. So we were like, okay, well, it could either take us 10 to 15 years of
like mild suffering,
mostly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Or it could take us 3 years of this is going to suck probably every day for the next 3 years straight.
And you had like 3 jobs, and so did your wife. So the first thing that you guys did was increase how many jobs you did.
Exactly. We had to go out and get some extra jobs.
Yeah.
So we did DoorDash and Instacart and Grubhub and Uber and any of the side gig economies, if you will, that you could find. My wife took on extra babysitting. Our schedule was literally I was getting home at 2 a.m. from my jobs, sleeping until 8 a.m, and then going back to work, during which period of time my wife had left at like 2:30 in the morning, and then she got back home at 8 a.m. And so we were basically passing ships. I would get back home at 5. We would eat dinner, basically, hi honey, how are you, good, leave. And then weekends were all side hustle. You're going in there on Saturday, Sunday, and you're doing 10, 12-hour days of Grubhub or DoorDash or Instacart. For me, it was part-time for the Army at the time, so I had those as well. And basically just every last cent you can get and grab and scrape around. And I know that's probably not most people's journey, right?
Yeah.
Most people are probably not going to be in a position that Krista and I kind of dug ourselves into. You're probably going to be in 10 to 15,000 in debt, which is most people. So you can either get super serious and be done in 12 months, or you can draw it out for the next 10 to 15 years, and that's really a choice that you have to make. And I think to go back to your guys' point, like being very specific behind what are we going to do with this money? Where is this money going? Because every single dollar coming into your account has a name on it.
Should have a name.
It's just whether, it has a name. It's just whether you're assigning it or whether it's assigning it to itself.
Yeah,
Right.
that's true.
And so the thing is, like, when money comes in, like you were saying, Jen, like having a spreadsheet where you have to actively go and look at it and say, this money's going here and this money's going here, tells your brain, I'm in control of my finances, I'm in control of my money.
Yeah.
And once you get that mindset down, it's much easier to manage your finances because you realize you are the manager.
Our mentor always said, you're either going to master your money or your money is going to be a master of you.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh.
That's really good.
That's
So
true.
just kind of recapping some of the things that Andrew talked about, maybe add in a couple. And so if you're saying, all right, well, I need to increase my income. So what are the options, right? Option number one is, well, if you're currently working, can you increase your income in your current job? Can you ask for a raise, right? Number two is, can you switch jobs and increase your salary by switching jobs? If you're a project manager over here making X number of dollars, can you go somewhere else and make an extra $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 by switching companies, right? So that's another way. Another way is to get an extra job, working part-time. For a long time we were working at a restaurant, part-time. I was working for a software company and working at a restaurant. You were working at New York State as a Spanish translator and at a restaurant. And so we had second jobs, right? There's a lot of different second job opportunities out there. A lot of times it's, in food service or different retail businesses that are open in the evening. Mm-hmm. It's picking up a side gig, like an Instacart, a Grubhub, a DoorDash, something like that, where you have a little bit more flexibility and you can make money on your own time. Mm-hmm. You could, oftentimes it might be difficult, but you may be able to do some sort of investing. Generally, that's not a short-term income solution. Doesn't mean it's not necessarily wise. That's something you got to get really specific. Like, it's hard to make general recommendations about that kind of stuff. Or you could start like a true side business and really have something that has some more long-term potential.
Right.
I think one of the things that in all of the different options that are available, I think what you just need to make sure you consider is not just your short-term goals. Mm-hmm. See, a lot of people, I think the pain or the potential benefit of the short-term situation tends to create lots of emotion, and people tend to make a lot of decisions based upon those emotions, and they'll just make a decision into something without understanding some of the longer-term consequences of that.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that we started to realize early on is, well, what are all of the goals? Like, not just the short term, let's look to the medium term and the long term, and allow that to influence our decisions now and our general direction now, so that we don't pigeonhole ourselves into a situation where we're making an extra $1,000 a month at a restaurant, but now all of our time is tied up into that. And so, yeah, we might have accomplished our financial goals, but now we've got a situation where our time is at risk. And maybe some of our midterm goals, which was to buy a new house, is now at risk, because if I give up this restaurant income, I'm not going to be happy in that house because I'm not going to have the money I need. But I'm also not going to be in that house if I'm not ever in it, because I'm working all the time, right? And so sometimes solving that short-term problem with the wrong mindset is actually hurts us when we don't think about all of it. So I just feel like one of the big factors for our success was really just considering all the things and making some decisions. And I think for us, what it was is we still picked up that second job, but our mindset around it was to treat that income very separate from our main budget, and truly treat it as extra and not start to depend on it, so that it could truly be an optional income.
Right.
So if we ever needed to get rid of it or wanted to get rid of it, we could, and all of that stuff was just extra that was going towards a specific purpose.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people grossly overestimate what they can do in 6 months, and they grossly underestimate what they can do in 6 years, right? And so, to your point, Joe, like, because they're looking for that instant gratification in the next 2, 3, 6 months, they undercut everything that they could have done if they had just given something time to develop over 2, 3, 6 years, right? And so the funnel of thought process is, I'm putting everything through these funnels of, does this match this goal? If it doesn't match this goal, then it's an automatic no, right? And we kind of had that conversation on this podcast before for other areas, but it works very, very well in finances. Like, if it's not accomplishing any of your short-term, midterm, or long-term goals by spending this money in this area, then stop spending the money, right? And so, yeah.
So just in wrapping up, Jen, like, what would you say would be like the biggest things that people should look to maybe take away from this, and then maybe a couple recommendations, resources that they should check out?
Yeah, I think biggest things would be going back to maybe the first and second podcast, or what is your why? What are your priorities? What are your goals, right? Because nobody can dictate that for you. You've got to figure that out for yourself. Number 2 for finances would be looking at your income, looking at your expenses, tracking that in a budget, and kind of figuring out where you stand, and then relating that back to your goals and breaking them down into short-term goals, midterm goals, long-term goals for yourself, and then looking at how do you want to hit them. Do you want to hit them with can you reasonably hit them in the time frame that you're looking for short-term, midterm, long-term goals, by getting a different job, by getting a second part-time job, by having a little gig on the side like an Instacart or Grubhub, or maybe you need to look at developing something different like a business for yourself, or an asset that's going to help you get more towards the midterm and long-term goals for yourself and your family. So I think those would be some of my top takeaways. And if possible, I would try to find a mentor who would be willing to look at your finances. There is something magical when somebody non-emotional looks at your finances, because they're not emotionally tied into what you did or did not do. They're not passing judgment, but they're also able to make recommendations that maybe it hurts for you to think about, but because they're not emotionally tied up into it, they can. And also, like, finding somebody, that mentor has to be somewhere further along in life than you are, and has to live the life that you want to ultimately end up living. And so for me, I could not go ask my parents. And I love my parents, I respect my parents, but neither one of them had a handle on money. Not the way that I wanted to have a handle on money. And so I needed to go outside of my family, and I needed to find somebody that was where in life I wanted to be at, and see if they were willing to give me some time, which is hard. You can go find a YouTuber that doesn't really know your name that can give you some, but that's not a person that it can really give you that mentorship and wisdom. And I said this last night, but when we were talking to a group of people, but people model their sports and their athletic journey after other people. People would look at somebody who's built like them. If you're built like a Steph Curry, if you're built like LeBron James, they would model their basketball game after somebody who's better than them, but who's built like them, and they feel like, reasonably speaking, they could potentially get to that level. Nobody does that in their finances today, which I feel like is crazy. If you're going to model your game after someone who's successful in sports, don't you think you should model your finances after someone who's successful in finances?
Yeah.
Because most of us are just modeling our finances after our parents. And there's like a 50-50 shot whether your parents are financially successful or not.
Absolutely.
It's probably like an 80-20.
Probably. Pareto's principle, 80%.
Yeah, I think that's great. I like my biggest takeaway just from this whole conversation is just the fact that talking about getting specific in where your money is going, because for us, one of our biggest drawbacks was setting the goal to save money. And I'm gonna tell you, I am a highly motivated person, so if I set a goal, we're gonna hit the goal. But the problem is, like, if the goal is to save money and the saving them of the money does not have a specific purpose, you will hit it and then spend the money.
Yeah, that's
because
true.
that's what money does. If you have a goal to, I am saving $1,000 to put away into an emergency fund and not touch this unless an emergency happens, then that goal becomes much more specific. So your brain says, this is allocated funds. This is not spending money. This is money that belongs to a purpose. And money, I've said this many times to people who've, called me materialistic because I want to have nice things like a house and nice cars and things like that. And I've said that to them before, like, money is the medium for exchange in the United States. And you're going to make money one way or the other for your entire life. Money is going to take on the characteristics of the person that holds it, which means, in my personal opinion, the better of a person that you are, the more money you should be going after. The more money you should be trying to acquire, because that means you're going to use it better than most. Let's be honest, if they took taxes away today, most of us would spend our money better than the government does. And so if that is the thought process, then how come we can't go out and get more money for ourselves and then spend it on helping the rest of the human race out, right? And so a huge takeaway for today is just coming up with some of those goals. Get some lofty goals that will not financially be obtained in your lifetime. They're financial goals that for the rest of your life, you're going to have to budget something towards this. So there's money constantly set aside that is not going to get drained by you setting something that's super short-sighted. Not to say that short-sighted goals are bad. You can have them, but understanding that if you really want to long-term get out of debt, just getting out of debt cannot be the goal. Getting out of debt for a purpose. Getting out of debt so that you can bring your spouse home. Getting out of debt so that you do not have to work as much. Getting out of debt so that you are not stressed and yelling at your spouse, or they're yelling at each other. I would say about money, but it's really about the lack of money, right? And that's really those are some goals settings around finances specifically that really makes you take your budgeting goals to the next level.
Awesome. Appreciate you guys' time. I think just in closing, like, none of us are certified financial planners. But we're just really sharing our experiences and what we've done and what's created success. And so, we can't guarantee that, these financial, concepts will create the same success for other people, but we know that they're based on principles. And so, principles really never change. So,
yeah. And I know they worked for us.
They did.
Right.
And they worked for a lot of other people that we've had the privilege of, honestly, had the honor and privilege of being able to mentor them. And I was talking to someone the other day, and I kind of went through my mind. I think, in our history, I think we've probably looked at well over 100 different people's budgets.
Easily.
And helped them really just get on track with their finances. Easily. And so, hope you guys have enjoyed this podcast, and we'll see you next time on the Next Level Podcast.
Hey guys, hope that added a ton of value to you.
If you're interested in getting a free budget consultation, we'd be more than happy to add some value to you. Click the link below, fill out a quick little form so we know how to get in touch with you, and we'll provide you with some resources and sit down with you for a quick 30-minute budget consultation.